So, after consistently putting out installments and review series containing a wide variety of incarnations, my last Middle Earth video came out in February, and then there was nothing. A few factors may have played into this. First, my life got insanely busy right after I posted my Two Towers video, and it didn't slow down for a couple months. The script had been finished back in January, so that part wasn't necessarily a problem, and I also recorded the voiceover too. But by the time I finally sat down to edit this thing, it had been months since I had seen the movie. I wasn't really up to it. But that's just a symptom. I've created videos in hectic times before. What it really was is that it's kinda hard to make a video on your favorite film of all time. It may sound easy, but when making it, I just sort of felt the pressure to make this extra good, more personal, so whenever I sat down to edit, there are things about the video that I would have been fine with in other products, but this had to be special. But at the same time, I didn't know how to make it special. I just knew how to make another video talking about a movie like I always do. On top of having other projects I wanted to work on, I just kept shifting this back, only occasionally opening the Premiere file and looking at the small amount I had done in shame, then guiltily clicking off. Continue that streak for 6 months until we're now in freaking August. So why is now the time I'm finally doing it? No reason at all. I guess I just finally got the wind back in my sails. Maybe I've accepted that this doesn't have to be my magnum opus. It can just be a video of a guy talking about his favorite movie. I don't need to stretch it too long. Well, at any rate, this intro is the only part of this video that was recorded this month. Everything else is Castleman's 6 months in the past. What an innocent guy. Without further ado, here's my review of my favorite film of all time. I've never cared about the Oscars. It's a pompous ceremony of the same sort of films winning over and over and over again, because of the boring criteria that most films being nominated have to labor under. Also meaning your favorite film of the year is rarely nominated, at least from what I've personally experienced, due to being a big fan of genre films like horror, sci-fi, and fantasy. Films like that are never given fair room in the discussion. It's always biopics or self-serious dramas, regardless if they're good or not.
And the Oscar goes to Green Book.
So yeah, I always tell people to stop caring about award shows, stop giving them credibility, and let them die the painful death they so desperately deserve. And then I always feel bad for this fight when I remember that Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King took home 11 Oscars back in 2004. Best Visual Effects, Makeup, Costume Design, Art Direction, Film Editing, Sound Mixing, Original Song, Original Score, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Director, and Best Picture. This ties the record for the most awards gained by any film in history. That alone wants to make me give the Oscars credibility. I still don't. Especially how they've gotten even worse these days, Shape of Water winning notwithstanding, along with arguments that in 2003, there were no movies that truly contested it, unlike most years with Oscars. But even then, there really was a magical night when the people in Hollywood with the highest sticks up their asses pulled them out just a little bit, to acknowledge that fantasy is a genre that needs to be recognized on a major level. The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King is my all-time favorite movie. I mean, you can point to plenty of grounded dramas that I love, or whatever else you may think of in terms of greatest film ever. But for me, what I most like to see in movies is escapism. I can see plenty of things in drama in real life, or at least something that correlates with it. What I love about fantasy, especially epic fantasy like this, is that it immerses me in a world that is not my own, where I can temporarily forget all of my problems and just enjoy a spectacle-filled wonder. And there's just no film that fills those qualifications for me personally than Return of the King. Of course, I also think the first two films are masterpieces, but same for Return of the Jedi, only on a better scale, and Deathly Hallows. There's something about an ending that just connects with me more. I honestly do believe that Return of the King is the best of the trilogy, even from a technical filmmaking aspect. There's little pieces in the first two where I can nitpick, but here, everything is just so technically flawless to me. I know there's parts of this movie that people complain about, but I just don't have an issue with any of them, as I will elaborate further in the video. This film is Peter Jackson's direction on the greatest level it's ever been. The way he channels great performances out of his actors and commands the action scenes, the visuals, and all the separate elements falling perfectly into place is some of the most impressive filmmaking ever put to screen. All of the previously mentioned great elements in my other reviews are here again, and they're just better than ever. If you watch the end credits, it's enormous because there are thousands of people who carefully crafted each individual piece of every frame that you see. When you think about film, you think of the director and the big names, but this film needed so many people to make it the masterpiece that it is. Howard Shore shifted things up a lot with his final score for the trilogy. The first two kept introducing new music, but it still fell back on the main themes a lot. With the final film to accentuate the darkness the characters descend into, those cheerful and heroic main themes are rarely heard. Instead, the new stuff provided adds to the rising stakes and mood that the final film in the trilogy needs. Plus, you just have epic moments like this. Play it, Howard. Seriously. Every movie, he's just making new, gorgeous music and taking old themes and exploding them into greater meaning. I'm so glad he won an Oscar for this one, too. The music from the first two films still comes back in the most important moments, unlike Prisoner of Azkaban, for example, where only Hedwig's theme came back. I love that soundtrack, but musical consistency across a film franchise is by far the most underrated element to constructing a truly great series, and Lord of the Rings did it better than any other, and that's one of the main reasons it's my favorite trilogy of all time. Return of the King is definitely the darkest in the franchise, and it's also the longest, with even the theatrical edition placing 20 minutes over 3 hours, while the extended edition is more than 4 hours long. That definitely comes with how large an extent of the Two Towers novel had to be placed here for pacing purposes. Yet, even with that massive length, watching this movie just flies by for me. Even for the extended edition, there's just not a single dull second here. I've seen 90-minute movies that drag by much longer than this, and it's all because every scene in the theatrical edition feels 100% necessary, and every scene in the extended edition just develops what was essential even more. What's really key about the extended edition this time around was the character of Saruman, who was just completely cut from the film released in theaters. In the book, of course, there is something called the Scoring of the Shire, in which Saruman retreats to the Shire, and the hobbits have to take it back from him after the main events of the novel have transpired. But you just couldn't have an extra hour and a half of the film after the main threat is defeated, so in the extended edition, we actually get to see the demise of Saruman. I think it works pretty well here, and it's sad they had to cut it out from the original version. After Saruman is finished, Pippin accidentally makes Sauron think that he is the ring bearer, so therefore Gandalf has to take him to Minas Tirith, separating him from Merry. It's interesting how in Two Towers the four hobbits are solidly split up into two pairs, and then in Return of the King they all are alone at one point in the story. This is good for both character and for building tension. With Merry and Pippin, separating them serves to establish them into fighting hobbits for the two big kingdoms of men, Rohan and Gondor. This is key to finishing their evolution from basically goofball stoners into one of the leaders of the charge of the final alliance. With Frodo and Sam, their friendship is undeniably the heart of this entire story. When Gollum tries to separate them, some have issues with how it's done, but I think it's necessary. It makes sense to make sure what's next to occur is more scary and threatening. Breaking up the Dream Team is essential to showing how much it's needed to resolve the climax. I really like the scenes in Gondor. Pippin's interactions with the steward, Denethor, are amazing. The beacons were already lit by the time he came to Minas Tirith, but they decided to emphasize the madness of Denethor and give Pippin a big moment to be involved in. One major change that these films made in terms of characterization was in the character of Aragorn. In the book, he was the kingly character from the very beginning, and Narsil was reformed when the Fellowship left Rivendell. But Jackson had a very purposeful goal to make all of the characters have an arc in some significant way. If Aragorn was the kingly badass the entire film, it just wouldn't work. You had to relate to him as the ranger from the north who was unsure of himself. Viggo Mortensen did an excellent job for portraying this. These changes to his character are able to give us certain moments so much more impact. When Elrond shows up to present the Flame of the West, newly formed, I immediately feel something. Doing this slow evolution to becoming this character, and combining it with heightened focus on his relationship with Arwen, is what makes Aragorn such a three-dimensional and great character in these films. Him taking Narsil and stepping into the Mountain of the Dead is the moment he fully accepts his title and begins to take advantage of the abilities he can command as king. We needed to know the Ranger before we could know the king. And that is why these movies are so great. And now we get to one of the greatest achievements in action filmmaking, the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. I can't think of any movie that was able to match the effective staging of this film. All of the Lord of the Rings movies have perfect action, but Return of the King stepped it up a notch with everything. It's also probably the best because at this point in the film, we care intensely about the characters involved in these battle sequences. Even if it's just nameless Rohan soldiers, we've already seen them suffer through Helm's Deep, so we know to root for them. It's also in this film that we finally get to see Éowyn shine. This is the best way you could insert a badass female character into a medieval fantasy world run by a monarchy. It's not in-your-face annoying messages that distracts from the story to push something, it's just representing it as a fact that she can do this, and when she says,
I am no man.
it's just an intensely awesome moment that really brings her character together. Miranda Otto's performance as Éowyn in these movies does not get enough credit. I also adore the moment where Aragorn steps onto the battle with Gimli and Legolas.
There's plenty for the both of us. May the best one win.
The sweeping shot of the army of the dead plummeting through the orcs. You could call this a Deus Ex Machina, but it was properly set up, and it's an understandable way for the odds of this immense battle to have been overturned. We then learn of Gollum's ultimate treachery as we then see the scene set inside Shelob's lair, which indeed was fantastic. The design for this huge, disgusting spider is yet to be matched. But the most incredible thing about this entire sequence is how it truly brings to the front the true hero of this entire series. It was never Aragorn, badass as he can be. It wasn't the wizard Gandalf, even though he helped set everything into motion. Even though through all of his struggles and pain, it was never Frodo. The person who is truly responsible for the fall of Sauron is a fat little gardener.
Let him go, you filth.
Samwise Gamgee, my favorite Lord of the Rings character and one of my favorites in all of fiction. This is a character who represents most clearly the Hobbit's comfortable life. Merry and Pippin were always outgoing tricksters, and Frodo was influenced by Bilbo his entire life growing up. But Sam was the one who had to step up. He was just a gardener. His loyalty to his friend Frodo is unparalleled, and his refusal to step down at any point is what sells it home. When he returns spectacularly to take down the monster spider Shelob, it feels amazingly triumphant. It's what a true friend does, to risk everything to make sure you're okay. Sean Astin was given the job of making us buy this little hobbit was the biggest badass in Middle-earth, and I think he did a fantastic job. Everything he delivers in this trilogy was fantastic, especially barreling through Cirith Ungol to rescue Frodo from orcs.
That's for Frodo! The Shire! And that's for my own Gandalf!
Oh, and no, Frodo and Sam are not gay. Like, I understand wanting more representation for LGBT people in film, but it saddens me that every time men show emotion or attachment to another guy that's not the stereotypical manly man tough outlook, it instantly means that there has to be romance involved. What's the matter with a good, healthy bromance? You're not going to go through the horrible shit that Frodo and Sam suffer through without becoming significantly closer. Not romantically, but something even stronger than that. Frodo and Sam is probably my favorite friendship in all of film, and I always thought it was done perfectly here. A moment that the extended edition was able to include that I found quite touching was Éowyn recovering in the Houses of Healing, where she meets Faramir. I like seeing these two get together, even though I understand the theatrical edition would have no room for it. And that's why I think the extended editions are the ultimate form of these movies. There's stuff in here that I would never call absolutely needed, but it adds so much to the characters overall and, in short, the viewer's experience. Also in the extended edition, we receive a scene where Aragorn directly confronts Sauron in the Palantir with his reforged sword. Even that the Battle of the Pelennor Fields is now over, Aragorn realizes he still needs to help Frodo. Therefore, all the remaining armies from the Pelennor Fields go forth into the final battle at the Black Gate. The final speech of Aragorn is what finally puts together all that kingly power to good use.
A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. But it is not this day.
It's an immensely powerful moment as he finishes it and says,
"For Frodo."
Meanwhile, the hobbits are slowly fighting up the hill to Mount Doom, and Sam continues to be the best friend ever.
But I can't carry you!
The cutting back and forth between the battle for the ring between the hobbits and Gollum, and the enormous final battle at the Black Gate was the perfect, epic finale that this movie needed. Thanks to this masterful editing, it turns what is basically a struggle amongst midgets for jewelry into one of the coolest final battles in cinematic history. And Gollum finally has his purpose, taking the ring down with him into the fires of Mount Doom. I love that even when the ring is destroyed, the hobbits who helped bring it to fruition are still certain of their own death. This was actually one of the main themes, them realizing that they probably won't come back. It was a suicide mission all along. I'll be honest, I like the cheesy scene when the Fellowship is reuniting. I seriously love it. After all the dark, traumatizing shit the characters have gone through, a scene that's sunny, corny, and happy is exactly what we needed. It really emphasizes that true evil has been properly vanquished. I like it. And then you have those people who complain that the Eagles could have carried them the entire way. You want to get into it? Let's get into it. The Eagles are some of the oldest beings in Middle-earth, and the reason that they can't carry the ring is the same reason that Gandalf or Galadriel were not able to. The ring is most likely to corrupt what it considers great and powerful, as they are the ones who are best able to accomplish their goals. And what do you want, a giant flying death bird? How helpful to Saruman would that be? That is exactly why, of all creatures, the hobbits were the ones who managed to do the impossible task of destroying the ring. It eventually got to them, but underneath it all, their simple pleasures and love of hearth and home were best equipped to fight its malignancy. It's the main theme of the entire story, the one that many seem to entirely forget. The smallest of things can save us all. That's why when it all comes together in possibly my favorite and most emotionally resonant scene of all time, at Aragorn's coronation, when he, the king of all of Middle-earth, bows down before these tiny people and says,
My friends. You bow to no one.
I can't help but cry. It's the moment in the trilogy that defines the 9 or 12 hours that came before it. The Hobbit's journey has truly come full circle. And finally, let's address the multiple endings, which are 100% necessary. I hate this inane criticism. They already shaved off 6 chapters from the book and you're still not happy? An immense epic like Lord of the Rings can't be capped off with a 5-minute scene that just finishes your usual 2-hour movie. You have to actually emphasize the purpose and scope of the enormous story that you went through. You just can't end the movie at Aragorn's coronation, or at the hobbits arriving back at Hobbiton, or at Sam's marriage to Rosie Cotton. When I was a kid, the reason I didn't quite love Lord of the Rings was because the ending with Frodo having to sell off and leave his friends felt weird to me. But over the years, it finally resonated deeply somewhere inside me. I finally understood it, even to a degree I can't explain. And not what is literally happening with Frodo, but it just gives me the feeling I should when I have to say goodbye. And now, I really need to say goodbye. Goodbye to Middle-earth, to all the joys it brings me. I only revisit these films once every few years, and it's just so much more special every time I sink into them. So just play the marvelous Into the West song, and let me say farewell to the wondrous world of Tolkien that I've been working on over the past several months. But thanks so much for sticking with me, and keep looking out for more videos if you feel sufficiently inclined.